if you log into that, you can hear more about this under this project. Terry, are there other websites that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
Well, the Sunboat website,
Sunboatcard.org. Well, Harry, I know that you have, a book in the works, that you're very, very active with 10 Rivers Food Web. When I look back at our 40 years of, being in this industry or this movement that became an industry, what do you see that you feel is really hopeful about what's going on for us now?
Well, I think you and I both know if we hadn't made the move with the national program in 1990, I don't think it would ever happen. And, it only happened by one vote in the House and one vote in the Senate. So thank you to your DeFazio and Senator Leahy.
Yes.
If it hadn't been for those two guys, we wouldn't have a program. And thank you again to Lynn Cody for standing there with Peter DeFazio and describing to people what it was that we were trying to do. We stood there on the House floor. Fortunately, we put that groundwork together when it had to be put together. What we have to do going forward, I think, is keep the expansion going. We have to somehow find mechanisms to allow these younger people who want to farm to be able to be on land that is the price of it's gone up, and it keeps going up. And we have to find ways, creative ways, to get that land out of this spiraling market thing. It just can't be held that way where at any point somebody can sell the land out under a farmer or the farmer themselves might sell it out. And we see all the time, we have 340 acres last year, suddenly because of a whim of somebody that helped leave, that 340 acres of organic grain became chemical overnight. So we have to secure the basis of the food that we're growing. Our farm set up with a family trust and corporation that includes the people that are farming it. So it took a lot of legal work to do that. But there's various ways to do it at this point. But that's got to be one of our focuses, is that we've got to focus on food land, what's necessary.
You are listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1. Listen to Rootstock Radio every Monday at 5:30 on WEFT Community Radio. Coming up next is In the Know, a left-produced public affairs show that highlights locally available resources. Stay with us after that for Champaign-Urbana Radio Theater at 7 p.m., Monday night R&R at 8, live local music on Left Sessions at 10, and recorded local music on Champaign Local 901 at 11. We're going to catch some quick underwriting, and then we will get to In the Know.
That's your armrest. Okay, sorry.
Good evening, CU community. You're listening to WEFT 90.1 Champaign. Welcome to In the Know, a public affairs show where social issues, trending topics, relevant research, and important perspectives are discussed so you, the listener, can be in the know. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the hosts and guests and not of WEFT. We're streaming live on my personal Facebook page. Listeners are welcome to submit comments and questions on the Facebook live stream or via Twitter at Nature79. This evening, we're going to be talking about food insecurity, what that really means, and how it affects our students here locally. I have three guests in the studio. I'll go ahead and have them introduce themselves. We'll start over here with Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea Sullivan. I am Secretary of the Board for Feeding Our Kids. Also, locally, I am an occupational therapy assistant at Danville District Schools.
Hi, I'm Ann Kirkland. I'm one of the co-directors of Feeding Our Kids.
Hi, Teresa Brown, Partnership Manager with Eastern Illinois Foodbank.
Thank you for being on the show tonight. So as always, we're just going to jump right in and discuss this concept of food insecurity. So when we're talking about somebody who is food insecure, what exactly does that mean?
Food insecurity, when we identify it, it's someone who doesn't know where their next meal is coming from. Someone that, when you ask, have you been hungry in the last 30 days? Or do you know where your next meal is coming from? Those two questions can really, bring to life someone's situation in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm. One of the, pieces of information that I found online talked about the ideas of hunger and food insecurity, that they're closely related but distinct concepts. Hunger refers to a personal physical sensation of discomfort, while food insecurity refers to a lack of available financial resources for food at the level of the household. And it was interesting because, I've volunteered with food banks and food pantries, and there was a breakdown on the USDA website that talked about high food security, marginal food security, as far as food security, and then food insecurity, low food insecurity, and then very low food security. So when it's talking about food security, it says high food security, no reported indications of food access problems or limitations. Marginal food security, 1 or 2 reported indications, typically of anxiety over food sufficiency or shortage of food in the house. Little or no indication of changes in diets or food intake. And then food insecurity, it said low food insecurity, reports of reduced quality, variety, or desirability of diet, little or no indication of reduced food intake. And then very low food security, reports of multiple indications of disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. There was also a survey that the USDA did for 2016, and it was kind of eye-opening as far as those 4 different distinct areas kind of unpacked. For instance, it said 98% reported having worried that their food would run out before they got money to buy more. So I think there's a lot of, interesting misconceptions around this this idea of food insecurity. I think you go with what the media shows you in movies, that you're talking about people who are starving, or people even kind of go to this idea that somehow there's an equivalence of what you would see maybe in a developing country with, food insecurity. But, it's, from what I gathered with, what I've seen over the years and what I've read, it's situational, or it can be more chronic. So when you're looking at food insecurity from what you've dealt with, when we're trying to help people understand, more of the situational short-term versus more of the chronic long-term, how do you explain that to people so they can have a better understanding of what this looks like?
Situational, I genuinely believe that we are all just one, really bad life event from being someone in need. If you were at one point, a 2-income household, and let's say you worked for one of the manufacturing plants or something like that that's in the area that closed, you've gone from a very substantial income to 0, almost overnight, with no planning. If you put into that a family that you need to take care of, and books to be made, and, schools to be taken care of right away, you've gone from a situation where you could genuinely, it's a speed bump, it'll be fine, to one where you are choosing between perhaps food for the family and medicine for a condition. Yeah. So it can really happen quite quickly.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's a misconception out there that if a person has a job, they're obviously going to have food, and that's just not the reality of it for a lot of families now. You might be what would be once considered a middle class, in that category, but now you're a lower middle class just because of the cost of food and the cost of apartment or, your housing. And so as a parent, you have to make that decision. Am I going to keep the lights on and the heat on in the middle of winter, or am I going to buy a vegetable for my kids to eat? And so when they go to the grocery store, and if they're using those SNAP benefits to be able to purchase food, a lot of times they're going to want to buy bulk food. Mm-hmm. So they have more to feed, which they think will provide their kid a fuller stomach, instead of the more expensive things that are more nutritious, but they won't be able to buy as much. And so sometimes, having to make those decisions of, am I going to spend my money on bills to keep the lights on, or am I going to buy the most nutritious food that I can? That's a hard decision to make. And then when we think about the kids that we're serving, a lot of those kids are already noticing, my parents are having to make this decision. Okay, if I've got food accessible, where do I have food accessible? Oh, it's at school. okay, at school, I'm going to want to take home that extra, I'm not going to eat this applesauce because I'm going to take it home for my kid, brother, or sister. And that's just not, not a decision a child should have to make. They shouldn't have to think about that. And they certainly shouldn't have to be responsible for feeding their siblings.
Right. And I think there's this idea that, again, it's really hard for some people to understand that this concept of the working poor. That's been a term that's been around for decades, but I think it's how it looks has varied. You saw back, in the era of the Depression and, coming out of different wars, the country as a whole struggled. And so I think you see that as, well, this is just kind of a symptom of what the country is going through. But, now you see there's so many different, gaps within socioeconomic status. And so I think what some people see as the working poor, they still equate that with poverty, which, it's not all of these extremes. There's these middle areas, these gray areas where you catch situations where, like you said, maybe there was a reduction in, hours worked every week, because of lower production requirements of work. And so this month it's difficult. Maybe next month, dad or mom will be working more. So I think we're always looking at what the media is trying to teach us, that it's these extremes when it's not. Like you said, you are kind of up and down. There's the ebbs and flows of income. It kind of speaking to what Anne was saying, in the survey, for instance, one of the statistics had said 97% reported that the food they bought just did not last and that they didn't have enough money to get more, but also 95% reported that they could not afford to eat balanced meals. And it's interesting because you find that processed foods are cheaper, and so people are spending money on that because they have to make SNAP benefits, last. Kind of, dialing it back for a second, what are SNAP benefits?
SNAP benefits are formerly known as LINK, the LINK card, and those are benefits that families or individuals and even students, I do like to point out that college students can also apply for these monthly benefits, then that helps subsidize, their meals. SNAP benefits, they're supplemental, and sometimes they can be small. They can be as small as $12 a month for what you go through, and it will buy you, your staples at the grocery store. One of the key pieces to that is you might be able to apply for SNAP benefits. Do you even have access to a grocery store? If you are in what we call, a food swamp, which is you might be surrounded by nothing but convenience stores or things like that may or may not accept your LINK or SNAP card. So you might not be able to access yourself of these benefits. But to get to a grocery store, you could get some staples if you're available to go through the process of going through the SNAP application, which honestly can be a little intense and exhausting.
My family actually went through some food insecurity, and that's kind of why we got involved with feeding our kids. And we actually did apply for SNAP benefits, and for a family of 4, we got like $20 a month, which was like on unemployment was enough to pay our rent, and then $20 a month doesn't go very far for a family of 4. So it was really difficult, to get by with that. So I just want to add that, the real experience with it. So
you're absolutely right. It does, and it was a process for you to go through.
Yeah, we had a waiting period. It was quite a while. We had to provide a whole bunch of documentation, which was difficult to get it all together and get it to them. And then we went through all that, and then they said, "Oh, here's your $20," and we were like, "This is not going to go very far, really."
So for those who may find themselves in need with it, I think they do offer emergency SNAP benefits while they determine if you're eligible or what you're eligible for. So if somebody does find themselves in a situation where maybe they need something to just tide them over, does anybody know how they exactly calculate? Is it, you're within a certain percentage of the poverty line, the size of your family, the number of children?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no, unfortunately, there's no set, if you hit this, you get SNAP benefits. It takes into multitude of equations based down to your income and whether or not you have savings and then people in your family and, you know, what your bills are. So I wish that there was a way to say, this is what it is and this is what you get. But there is probably what, a 16-page application?
Yeah, it was a lot.
And
And all your documentation from all of your bills and everything else had to be submitted. It was like pretty much you had to pour out your life story, like on these 20 pages, and it felt real invasive, you know. Having not really been through that experience before, it was just overwhelming. So
it is. It can be disheartening.
So, you know, again, when we're kind of looking at this idea of, like you said, students, one of the things that I was doing financial wellness work on the U of I campus here was that I learned that students are considered to be in poverty while they're in college because they have no income. But I think, you know, some of them, unless maybe they're coming from a household that has gone through this process before, some of them may not be aware that they have access to this resource. I think there's, you know, just with any type of social service, there can be some stigma around, you know, like you said, it's invasive and you have to kind of put yourself out there and, you know, almost plead your case for needing resources for your family. And then if you're a student, I think some of them might think that, well, you know, my parents can help me, or, you know, there's a variety of different things that they talk about, which obviously if you have a resource with your parents, that's great. But some, you know, again, are coming from a household where their family needs this. And so, you know, if that resource is available to them, I think U of I and Kirkland both now have food pantries that are accessible for the students. You know, again, if they're aware of the resources that are out there. One of the articles that I read said that in the United States, more than half of hungry households are white, and 2/3 of those with children have at least one working adult, typically in a full-time job. So again, this isn't what you typically see in a movie where people are living without any income. You know, we're talking about the working poor. But I mean, does that statistic seem right to you that this is the kind of demographic that we see when we're looking at those who are coming to, you know, either Eastern Illinois Foodbank or one of its pantries?
We really do. You know, the demographic is, it also includes immigrants that are coming in. You know, we have a large Congolese population here in Champaign. Migrant workers that come in, and maybe aren't completely familiar with the system because they don't have this in their own country.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think that's also one of the things that, you know, again, if somebody is new to, I think even it can differ a little bit state to state from what I've read, but, you know, especially somebody's coming here from a different country, like Andrea was saying, Teresa was saying, that there's so much you have to learn. And like you were saying, there's this long application. I think, you know, from one of the parents that I talked to who was undocumented, the concern was, well, if I apply for this resource, do they find out that I'm undocumented? Now you have this whole other layer of concern. Now you're not just worried about where your next meal is going to come from with that resource, but then is this going to be a resource that's going to report to the federal government that I'm undocumented? So, you know, you have so many of these factors that kind of compound each other, where are parents really getting what they need for their families because of all of these other concerns?
Right. Well, and then if they do get SNAP benefits, like Andrea was saying, they don't stretch. And then our community really does have a wealth of food that's available with the number of food pantries in the community. And so, but the only problem is being able to access those. So a lot of them will give out bags of food, but if you have no car and you're having to carry all of a sudden like 4 bags of food that is available to you, but you're a single parent and you have like a toddler, you're not going to have your toddler carry 2 large grocery bags. So what do? You take the 2 that you can carry, right? And so then again, even though they had access to the food, they don't have vehicle access to be able to actually get the food back home to them. And so we found, as we've talked to different communities, that Feeding Our Kids serve some of the more rural schools that we serve. We talked about, like, okay, does this program make sense for your students and that kind of stuff? And one of the things that's been brought up and is very important to us is because we work through the social workers in the school, and the food is given out directly into the bags, and they're not too heavy. That these kids can easily bring home the food. And like if they're taking a bus, nobody has to go anywhere else. That food is immediately in the hands of the child, so they know each weekend that they've got something to eat. And that's made a big difference, and definitely something that we keep kind of, wanting to make sure that it's the one place that they can count on for food during the week is at school for breakfast and lunch, and they get an extra bag of food that they can take home, and they don't have to worry. The parents don't have to worry about, transportation for a little bit of food anyway.
Yeah, one of the articles also, it was specifically talking about Houston, Texas, but it referred to this idea of a food desert, which I think is kind of what you were referring to. It says tens of thousands of people in Houston and in other parts of the U.S. live in a food desert. They're more than half a mile from the supermarket and don't own a car because of poverty, illness, or age. Public transportation may not fill the gap. Small markets or fast food restaurants may be within walking distance, but not all accept vouchers. If they do, costs may be higher and nutritious options fewer. So again, we're looking at, okay, so you do have your resource, but are you able to access anything just because you have this resource? And now again, we have these variables that are kind of compounding each other.
I think too, a lot of times in the case of like the working poor, it's like, well, the food bank or whatever your options are open from this time to this time on this weekday. Well, that's when I'm working. Like I can't get there during that time. So I can work and earn my money and keep my job, or I can go get food that will last for a short period of time. So that's an issue too, I think.
Well, and I think that's another misconception that, well, you obviously know food is in need. Aren't you going to do what it takes to be able to access that resource? Well, it's not that simple. Like you were saying, some people cannot take off work. I mean, that could be the difference in their job, especially if you know that you may have to take off more than once to be able to access this obviously, huge need that you have for your family. And so it's not just as simple as saying, here's a resource, here's the times, here's how you get there, even by public transportation. It's, well, is that within your schedule to do that? Or, even if you have a parent who takes off and they're going by public transportation, like Ian was saying, how much can they carry on their own on public transportation back to their home? So there's so many variables, I think, that can compound this issue of food insecurity that people just don't, I think, take into consideration when they're saying, well, the resources are there. Why aren't you accessing those resources? I kind of heard about this concept when I was at Wesley. One evening, we were talking about this idea of a food desert, and one of the people who was there had driven down from Marine Tool. They had caught a ride with somebody. They had come to Champaign because they said there was really nothing for them in Marine Tool, and they also lived in kind of a outside of basically city limits. They were in the country, and they said, we can't just catch a bus like you can in Champaign and go. Even if they had a good solid food pantry here, we couldn't just go access it anyways because we don't have our own form of transportation. And they said, we actually had to arrange for a ride to come all the way down here to be able to access this. But, we, I think she was saying that it was interesting, the conversation I had, I'll say that, because they felt guilty about having this resource because they felt like we have this huge family, we don't want to take everything that, we're allowed to take. We know that you have to stretch this to feed a lot of different families. But the idea was, that's the whole reason why it's here, is that, whatever the food pantry is allowing you to take up to the maximum of whatever you're allowed to take. Because at the end of the day, you don't know if you're going to be able to, take off the next time, I think that's something that some people, again, forget when they're saying, accessing this resource. It's not just as simple as accessing the resource.
Yeah, there's like a whole shame feeling that goes along with it too. Because I mean, after being food secure all my life and then having this situation where we had going and waiting in line, like with your laundry basket with like hundreds of people, and you have to stand there for a long time. Like this wasn't in this area; it was up like northwest of Chicago. But we would, you'd have to go stand there in line for hours and like wait to get your food basket filled, and it just felt I don't know,
Degrading.
demeaning. Like, it's like I'm a person and I feel like I'm not being respected or whatever. And so that's one of the things I really like about our food bags is just because it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be putting yourself out there. All you have to do is sign a permission slip in the bag. The food comes home in the bags, so it just comes in the normal routine things. So.
Here it is, Nicole.
Forgot. I'm sorry. But there's something about talking kind of about that shame. We as parents especially have so many things that we're already berating ourselves about. I'm not doing good enough in helping my kid with my homework or making sure they get there on time. To have this one more layer like you keep talking about of, we're in this situation now and we can't provide enough food. I'm not a good parent. And that's not the case. We don't need anything else out there. There's enough stuff in our culture running around degrading how we parent and how we take care of each other that we don't need that. And I think that that's something that as a community that we need to, there's a cultural change that needs to shift about, about accessing the food pantries and about using that. There's a whole idea of, we don't want this to be, I tell people about feeding our kids that I always want to work myself out of a job. I don't really want feeding our kids to exist. Every time we celebrate a birthday, it's almost our 4-year anniversary, like next week. I'd rather us be celebrating like we don't need to exist anymore. Parents have all the money for all the food they need. I'd rather that be the kind of goal and anticipation that we're trying to work toward, and not like, I always feel this weird like when people ask me how many kids we're serving, and I tell them about 800. They're like, wow, that's really great. I'm like, no, that really sucks. I'd rather it be like 10. I'd rather see that number go down instead of keep increasing. And because I always wonder, I want the parents who, if they happen to be listening to this, if any of the parents or the families that get the food from any of the food pantries are feeding our kids out there, I want them to know that they're being supported. There are people who are doing what we do because we believe that they can be better when they're fed, right? Mm-hmm. I believe that the kids who get the food from Feeding Our Kids are going to be the leaders and the successors and the amazing scientists and doctors and the next inventor who does something cool. And it might be because they actually had some peanuts one weekend and that helped them ace their next test. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so that whole, I like, we need to keep talking about that hunger is real in our community to try to also like offset that shame that people feel when they can't provide enough.
Well, I think just the basic concept that, food is a need. It's not a want. It's something you have to have. And so, treating somebody, kind of talking about what Andrea said, just treating somebody like a human and recognizing this is a need and that there's a resource that should be there in case you can't do that. And that, like you said, it can feel like you're failing as a parent. We beat ourselves up enough about that as it is. But, back in 2008, I remember, I think it was in 2009 actually, that I read an article, and it was a Fortune 500 CEO who was out of a job and was a pizza delivery driver because of the economic crisis we had. All of a sudden, he was facing decisions he had never had to face before. And he said, there's a lot of pride that you swallow when you were capable of probably feeding your whole neighborhood and now you can't feed your family. And so I think we need to stop seeing that as a failure and just recognize that life happens, and that you have to be able to get over that hurdle. And as much as it can be a little pride swallowing, ask for that resource, use that resource, make it your leg up, your step up, versus seeing it as an anchor keeping you down. I mean, I think at some point everybody has needed some help from somebody, but utilize that as a stepping stone. Don't see it as this is where you're dropping anchor. Just see this as a resource to keep you afloat, so you can do what you need to do to hustle and get your family in a better place. But there's a lot of stigma when it comes to using any type of social service. You just want to feel as a parent, I'm capable, I can do this, I can figure it out. But that's where, like you said, Feeding Our Kids is more, is to be able to say, this kid has what he needs, and so hopefully he's going to go on and flourish and do well, and hopefully this will be that pivotal point for him and his family where now they've had this service that can really help them, fill this need, and then that's just one thing they can check off that they don't have to worry about.
I think one of the coolest things that I've been able to experience, and Andrea is a good example of this, is when we ask for donations and stuff, and that's how we run by donations. But the number of people who will come up to me and say, "Hey, I happen to have an extra $20. If this program was around when I was a kid, I know I would have been receiving these bags for sure. My parents would have wanted that, and because of that, I'm going to give you $20." And so there's a cool thing that's coming around that people are understanding, and recognizing, like, I've been in this situation and I'm going to help, the next person not have to continue to be in this situation. And I think that, Teresa has probably seen that too with the different food pantries and stuff.
We do, and we do food mobiles where we load up our trucks and we go out to different locations across our service area. We were at one on Saturday, and there was a volunteer, and this young person, and I'd say he was probably 12 years old, and he told me a story about how he and his mom used to wait. And he goes, "I'm so glad to be on this side of the line." He wasn't be able to give back because we really couldn't have done it. And so when people think about, giving back or paying it forward, it's not just adults, and Andrea hit on it before, it's that young person that should not have to be making those decisions for their family. And you do see it coming back around, and the people that do want to pay it forward. And like she said, if it was, a different resource when we were growing up, and that $20 goes a really long way.
Yeah. So, I think when people kind of conceptualize this idea of not having enough food, they might think of it as, oh, I skipped a meal before at work, because I was too busy to take a lunch. But this is, when we're talking about the effects of food insecurity, what do you want people to understand when we're talking about the effects of food insecurity on our students? As far as just their mental health, their academic performance, what are we seeing when they aren't getting what they need?
Statistically, and we're seeing lower test scores, lower performance scores. You touched on it when, we've all been at some point during the day, we're like, oh, I could really use lunch, but we know lunch is coming. Mm-hmm. And, for this young person, they don't know if there's lunch, they don't know if there's dinner, they don't know if there's breakfast the next day. And we put a lot of emphasis and stress on test scores and academic scores. And if you aren't given the fuel for your body to perform and get these resources, then you're not going to get those results. And so as a student, whether it's, elementary or middle school or high school, or even on the collegiate level, where that competition is that much stronger, if you're running on an empty tank, Anne said it best, imagine, take advantage of the resources and see what you can do with that. You could be that next great person just by taking advantage of what's out there.
And Teresa hit on the academics that are affected when you're hungry, but a lot of people don't realize or think about the fact that your behavior changes too when you're hungry. A lot of kids will start to act out and not really know. The younger they are, the more they can't verbalize like how hunger is affecting them, because they don't put those two things together. Mm-hmm. They might be hyperactive, or they might be sluggish. They might, act out violently because they don't know what else to do or what to ask for. They may not have adults in their life that are interacting with them very much because they're also hungry, And so one of the things that I've found out is that there have been kids through our program that weren't doing very well in school because they weren't paying attention to the teacher because they were hungry, and just kind of blew off the adult figures in their life. But this one adult came to them with food, and at first they refused it. And as the social work kept coming around and saying, "No, you can take this, and you can have it," they started to build a relationship with the child. And sooner or later, the kid came around and would greet them, and then hug them and thank them. And the whole attitude of the child then turned around. And then after that social and that physical aspect got changed for them, their academics got better, right? And so you kind of have to take care of that physical part in order for the academics to come.
Right.
So,
Well, there's, I mean, the whole hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure as a social worker you're familiar with, but you gotta have housing, you have to have a safe environment, you have to have your belly full before you can move on to those higher level thinking. It's just not gonna happen if your basic needs aren't met. So
Yeah, and I think, obviously there's a correlation with food insecurity and poverty. And so typically when you have a household that's dealing with poverty, this is just one of the financial struggles that they have. And maybe, are we able to keep the lights on? Are we able to keep, a roof over our heads? And so there's just all of this turmoil, I'm sure, that's going on for the student anyways, even beyond food insecurity. But food insecurity is probably the one that will hit them without any type of voluntary interaction on their behalf, because this is your biological, your physiological response to hunger is, like you said, there's behavior problems, concentration problems, they can be, sluggish. But, you have students who, it's no wonder there's behavior problems. They have all of this that they know is going on in their household. And I'm sure many of them probably feel helpless because they are a youth. They're not able to really make, move mountains for their family to give them the things that they need. And so, again, this is one of those things where it's just so important to be able to support resources like feeding our kids, because that's one thing they can check off. At least can we get, eat what you need to be nourished so you can thrive. Not, when we talk about child welfare and we talk about a failure to thrive. Sometimes that happens because of neglect, because you have a parent who is unable to provide, food for their children. I think that, it's one of those things where people don't, unless they're experiencing it, not skipping a meal today or skipping a meal tomorrow, or maybe, not making it to the grocery store this weekend. We're talking about never really knowing where your next meal is going to come from. I think that's when you have this issue of, being able to put yourself in that student's position, or even in their parents' position, like, Andrew was sharing, of having to seek out this source and, answer invasive questions. One of the other things that it talked about in the survey was 68% of respondents reported that they had been hungry but did not eat because they could not afford enough food. Kind of along the lines of what you were talking about. What if you have a student who, they're not eating everything they should have lunch because they're conserving food for later, or maybe they're sacrificing eating something so that their sibling can have something. Again, those are decisions that these students should not be facing. That's a tough thing, I think, for, parents to make that sacrifice, but now the student kind of sees that, well, I should do this so that my family would be able to benefit. That's a really tough thing that you're asking a young kid to do. And so that's just one more distraction. It's keeping them from having their education. And so now we're not talking about the short term of what they're not getting now. Long term, are they going to have the education that they need so that this doesn't become a cyclical, issue, a family problem where they're able to rise above because they, like you said, they had everything that they needed, including food in their stomachs, to be able to flourish throughout their academic career, versus not getting what they need. And so now they're stumbling blocks and they're not, able to be successful in school. And now they find themselves graduating from high school and they might not be able to secure a job, or they might not be able to get into college. And now are they facing their own poverty when they start their own family?
one of the cool things that I wanted to mention, because I don't think we have yet, is that the high schools in the area all have food pantries in them, and kind of like what you were talking about. And that's very intentional. So these students who are becoming young adults, who are really starting to think about, like, what am I going to do for a career? How am I going to take care of myself? And, and if there was food insecurity in their family, they probably all along have been thinking about, like, how do I take care of my younger siblings? Right. And it was very intentional that these pantries were set up to keep the students in school so that they can get a good job, that they would stay in school, and the benefit and the payment they get for that is being able to come to the pantry and pick out food for their family to be able to have or take home.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great, thank you for bringing that up. You know, the high schools here in Champaign-Urbana and even Rantoul, pardon me, all have school pantries. And they're not only available to the student, but the student family. So, you know, the student can come in and shop and pick things out. Garden Hills also has a school pantry that's open to the whole Garden Hills community. And it's these resources that a lot of people really don't know about. But again, it's to get those students involved and engaged, and they're comfortable. They're comfortable at school. They form those relationships with the people in the pantry, which makes them feel more secure and able to come in and get those resources.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting them in a place, kind of like we talked about, like here are the students, we know the students will have transportation hopefully back and forth from school to home, you know, and then they'll be able to have food to be able to take, you know. Again, there's some issues when I volunteered in one of the pantries in the high school that the pride, right? Like, how do I get this food and not let my friends know that I'm taking food, you know?
Right.
But the volunteers, all of them understand that and respect that, you know, and the teachers do too, you know, and so kind of we work with the students saying, you know, how much can you take? What can you put in your backpack? Or, you know, bring a bag that looks like any other bag that, you know, you can just stash some in and nobody will know that it's food in there. It could be your book, you know, just your other book bag or whatever, or your gym clothes. And so, you know, there's a lot of volunteers who are like, okay, I want to respect, you know, that privacy that you have about this, but let's make sure that you're getting food home somehow.
Mm-hmm. I think we also need to be aware of, you know, changes that happen on a federal level that can impact and trickle down to our community level. In the article that I was reading, it talked about this wife and her husband. They said, you know, they put one bill against the next, the phone against the rent, against the heat, against the gas, trying always to set aside money to make up for what they can't get from the food pantry or with their food stamps, which, if anybody's curious, SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But there were congressional cuts to SNAP last fall of $5 billion, which took her benefits from $205 a month to $172 a month, which, you know, again, if you're not having to live off of this, it may not seem like a big deal, but when every single dollar matters, when you have a household of, you know, more than 2 people, you know, like you were saying, $20 for 5 people, that's not even remotely realistic. And then you have a situation where now you're not even sure if you're going to get that the next time because of federal cuts that are being made. And so, again, when people are thinking about how to be involved and how to, you know, support their community, think about these things when you're talking to your elected officials so that they are recognizing here on this community level, you know, like Andrea sharing their story with an official, or, you know, these families who can say, we're affected by this. This is what this looks like. You know, even, you know, like we've been talking about here, maybe reminding them that this will all come full circle at some point. If you're not giving them what they need throughout their academic career, you're either paying on the front end or the back end, as I always like to say. You're going to pay somewhere. But if you're paying on the front end to get them what they need, then they may be able, once they're at the end of that journey, be able to come back around and contribute, like, you know, you were saying, and be, you know, financially responsible and be able to give back versus are we paying for them now here on the back end because we weren't able to give them what they needed. They weren't able to thrive with their academic careers. And now we're not sure if they're going to get into college, and we're not sure if they're going to be able to have a career that can sustain a family. You know, those are the things that we need to remind elected officials about when they're being faced with, okay, what are we cutting? Unfortunately, social services always get cut first, but maybe if we remind them, by the way, you know, your job is paid for with our tax dollars. You don't have to worry about food insecurity, but, you know, there are people in your communities that you represent, and this is what it looks like when you don't give them what they need.
Personally, I feel like if you invest in the early issues, then it's a lot less expensive in long term because you're not having to support people over the long term. If you give them what they need in the beginning, then they can work on their own to do better for themselves. Whereas if they just don't have it in the beginning, then the government is supporting them in the long term.
Right, yeah.
So,
yeah, it's usually less expensive to be proactive and preventative than it is to be reactionary. Because then, again, as we see compounding variables, you know, by that point when they're graduating from high school, what else are we having to worry about? There are also health issues because I don't think people realize that it's not like, a commercial that you see for a developing country and children who are starving. There are still health issues that you can experience when you're not getting the proper nutrition, when you're not able to, get even just enough to, like you said, to be able to concentrate or to thrive at all. And so, again, I think these are things that this is why we have this discussion, so people can understand exactly what food insecurity means and what the effects are of it. So we talked a little bit about, the different programs that are available in the area, but just so people understand, what are food banks and food pantries?
Eastern Illinois Food Bank, we are the supplier for the food pantries in our 17-county area. We're not open to the public ourselves, but we provide the resources and the wherewithal for these pantries to get the food out to individuals. And by pantries, it's soup kitchens, it's great backpack programs like Feeding Our Kids to give them the resources. The pantries are going to be the ones that are actually open to the public, that the public can come and get the resources at. So it's a little bit of a difference.
Mm-hmm. And so with school programs, I think, we've also talked about what they're able to offer. So we do have like a free and reduced lunch program. So, students who qualify can either get a reduced cost for lunch or their lunch for free. And so you see, schools like Garden Hills who have a high free and reduced lunch population. So it's good to hear that they have their own pantry now, because that was definitely a need that I think they've had for a long time. But we also have like you said, the backpack program. So kind of tell us where Feeding Our Kids, like what started it? What gave you this? Where did you see the need, and when you were thinking about that need, what made you decide to go this route?
So Feeding Our Kids started from the realization that there are children out there having to make that decision about, I've got this food at school, what can I eat here and what can I take home? Not only for myself, but to feed siblings. And so talking with the social workers in the schools, Janelle Keene and I started talk together and realized that we need to do something about this. This is a big program that's not being properly covered by the programs that existed at that time. We needed to make sure that the kids in our schools, we have 5 kids among us, and so we wanted to make sure that the classmates of our children were getting fed. And we had no idea exactly the breadth, depth, or the how wide this program really, or how wide the issue was when we first started it. We thought we were going to just have 2 schools that we're going to do this with, and we were thinking maybe 18 kids, maybe that would raise, maybe 50 or something. But by the end of that first year that we got started, it was 150 kids in like 7 schools. And that's just exponentially grown. And so now we're in 36 schools, and like I said before, almost 800 kids. And so we differ from a lot of the different food pantries because we specialize, or we are very picky about what we send. We want to make sure that it's kid-centric food, the stuff that kids can easily prepare if they need to, or even just open and eat without having to heat up, because some of the younger kids may not be able to reach the microwave or whatever, but we still want them to be able to have something to eat each weekend. And so we want make sure, instead of the food in the bags is not designed to feed the whole family on purpose. It's to feed each kid. And so the social workers in the school, whenever they ask, well, I've got this one child I know, but excuse me, but I know they have siblings. We're like, if there are siblings in your school, you need to feed them all. If you think one needs it, then you need to feed all of them. We don't care. That's fine. If you know the siblings and where they go to school, you need to let us know, and we need to contact that school. Let's get a whole family of kids fed. If they've got younger siblings, let us know. We'll figure out how we can get food to them too.
So if you have, I guess what's the process for a student becoming part of Feeding Our Kids?
It's very simple. Basically, part of the program is that Feeding Our Kids, our volunteers and our board of directors, none of us know the children served. Very intentionally, we've left the identification of the students up to the schools. We believe that the social workers and the teachers and the people who are directly working with the kids know them well enough to know who has the needs, and we don't really need to know that. And so they identified the students and talked to the parents to make sure that they're aware that there's going to be, and ask for permission if it's okay for students to bring home food. Mostly because we're concerned about any allergies that might be in the home. We want to be, and we're respectful of those allergies, and we try to make sure that our bags are allergy free as best as we can. But once the parents have given permission for the kid to have a bag, basically the social workers give us a number each week. I need 13 bags this week. Okay, I need 25 bags this week. And then we have an amazing team of volunteers who come and bag up the food, and another whole other host of volunteers who take tubs of bags to each of the individual schools. And then the social workers pass them out in such a way that the students not being called forth amongst their peers to know, like, oh, you're getting a food bag this week. But hopefully it's being put, they're either being called to the social worker's office or it's being put in the backpack at a time when the, students are in the hallways. And then, they can take the food home without necessarily sharing or disclosing that they're getting the help.
So just, is it self-disclosure from the student, or does the teacher identify maybe signs of food insecurity, or is it up to the social worker?
It could really be either way. I mean,
Okay.
if the student comes to the teacher or the social worker, or the social worker or teacher might notice that they don't have much in their lunch, or, they know that their family's having a hard time. They've heard it from, the parents or whatever. It could be from different sources.
And so the parents can also contact the school and say, we've heard about this program.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any eligibility? Like, we talked about the invasive SNAP application. Is there anything like that they have to go through?
No, there's just a permission form. Basically, they come to the school. The social worker would send them a permission form. The parents sign it, and that's all that has to be done. So there's no income verification or anything like that.
Are there any limitations as far as how long a student can be on the program? Or is it just as long as the need is there? Let's say they enter at kindergarten and they need it all the way to 12th grade. Is that an option?
It would be. Like we said, we don't know who the students are, so it's up to the social worker. But, it could be that length of time if that was what the family was needing.
That's good to know. If they're, listeners, if you know somebody who needs the program, you need it, it sounds like it's just as simple as contacting the school, or, if they have a better relationship with the teacher, can the teacher kind of be that, middleman to get their student connected?
Anybody that the parent or the student is comfortable talking to in a school district. A lot of times parents will have a particular staff member that they feel more close to, that they're willing to disclose this kind of information to. And so as long as they let somebody know, then they're more than willing to, lend a hand.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions I had, staff benefits, obviously is something that some people need. I know at one point, Eastern Illinois Foodbank, even at their mobile pantries, were helping to educate and sign people up for staff benefits. Is that still something that you provide, or do you direct people more towards, because I think you're able to do it online now, aren't you?
You are able to do it online.
Okay.
At our mobile distributions, we don't offer SNAP sign up any longer, but we do direct them with the resources and the information on how they can go online and sign up for the SNAP benefits.
And so who, just so, again, for listeners who may need this type of resource, where are the food pantries within the area?
That's
Just Champaign Urbana, we'll stick to those, because there's a lot I know.
It is. There are a lot. My best recommendation would be go back to our website, which is eifoodbank.org. And you can go to Champaign County, or if you're a listener from another county, click on a county that you live in, and it's going to give you a complete list of all of our pantry resources, the hours that they're open, phone numbers, days of operation, and help you get those needs. Our food mobile schedule is also on there. And then if you are a veteran, VFW Post 630 also does a monthly distribution. So we kind of have everything covered. We talked about school pantries earlier. There's a section on the page as well that tells which schools have pantries and how to get resources at those locations too.
So here's a question that I've heard different people ask, and it's been a discussion I've even heard when I volunteered at different pantries. If somebody wants to utilize all of the resources that they see, their child goes to the pantry at school, and maybe they go to the pantry at church, and then maybe a different week they go to another pantry. I know at Wesley there wasn't really any type of verification that was rock hard, where they said we have to have like pay stubs and all of this other stuff. If somebody says, "Can I utilize all of these resources?" How do you respond to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would too. I would tell them yes.
Yes, absolutely. That's why they're there. You have to take advantage of their resources. You might find, one thing at Wesley, and that the Wesley date might work for you on that particular day of the month, and then another day you might need a daytime distribution over your other food meal. Yes, take advantage of all the resources.
Because I think again there's feeling of are you being greedy when you're utilizing more than one pantry? But again, I think your family best. I know there's again this misconception that some people play the system or they take advantage of the system, but I think for every person that may do that, there's probably a whole lot more people that aren't. They are really using these services because they actually have to have them. I think when I was at Wesley, they said that a lot of the food pantries operate, the third week of the month, because that's typically when SNAP benefits run out. There was some statistic there that said, you may have SNAP benefits, but, as we've discussed here, that may not take you through the whole month. And so that's why, there are certain pantries are scheduled on certain times, because they recognize that this is about the time of the month when, families are going to start to struggle because those SNAP benefits are running out. You were going to say something? No. So yeah, I think again, if you need those services, visit the Eastern Illinois Food Pantry website. What was the address again?
It is eifoodbank.org.
Okay, and so you get a chance to look at all the different resources available. Churches have them, like we said, schools have them. There's a whole lot of different resources out there. I think the nice part is, from what I've seen with the pantries, is they also have a lot of other resources on hand for a lot of other different needs. So it's kind of nice to be able to go and have a discussion maybe with this trusted group of volunteers that you've got to know because you utilize the service so often, and be able to disclose to them, hey, do you know where I could get, healthcare services because I don't have insurance, or where I could get, classes or something like that. I think that's the really great part about how the social services work. You can stop at one, and usually they can direct you if you have needs for others. Are there any other resources available that you can recommend for families, other outside of pantries, if they are struggling with food insecurity?
Well, I do like to bring up, when you talk about pantries and their locations, they are in some places where maybe people don't even think of. We have a pantry inside Champaign Public Health. So if you're there for, a well visit or something like that, there's a pantry that's available there. If you go to Promise Healthcare, they have a food as medicine program. So there is, if you're there just for a doctor's visit, they have a food pantry set up there. There are all kinds of different internal resources that are like that. If you happen to go to Daily Bread Soup Kitchen for a hot meal, they have resources that are there to help you with light heat or SNAP benefits and things. So each of the pantries, like you said, not only can get you that food and the nourishment to help your family sustain, they can offer you those extra resources as well.
So one of the questions that, and this is more, I guess, of a debate that I've heard than a question, but using SNAP benefits, because I think everybody wants to try to be healthy. They obviously want to have food first, and sometimes nutrition comes second. But as far as maybe some of the local organic stores, do they accept SNAP benefits if some family is really wanting to help their family be more nutritious?
For the most part, they do. And even though the season has ended, the farmers markets are wonderful. They also accept SNAP benefits. And Land Connection, that was right down the street in downtown Champaign, and even Urbana Farmers Market were doubling and sometimes tripling SNAP benefits at their farmers market. So those are resources that that are great. So people might think, oh, I can't go to the farmer's market, but if you can get 3 times the value of your SNAP benefits, absolutely, it's so fine.
Well, and those are places that, you can get the fresh vegetables, and if you just go to the regular grocery store, that they're pretty expensive. And like Teresa said, I heard that they were doubling and tripling sometimes the SNAP benefits just to encourage people to make sure that they were getting to the farmer's market over the summertime. So,
Great.
excellent.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of different options out there. You just kind of have to maybe start with the Eastern Illinois Foodbank website and kind of move out from there. But yeah, thank you guys again for being on the show tonight to talk about this. I think this is something that probably a lot of people have struggled with at some point. And, for those who finally need these resources, definitely, search them out, find the pantry that will work for you. And like we said here, definitely don't hesitate to take advantage of them, because this is something that families really need to have. Any other pieces of advice that you have for, parents or?
I'll just close it. We touched on it earlier. As parents, take advantage of the resources. We, especially as moms, we tend to beat ourselves up quite a bit. So let the resources that are available help you take that one thing off your plate.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in to In the Know on WAFT 90.1. Tonight's show will be archived on radiofreeamerica.com, my personal Facebook page, and on Tumblr at InTheKnow217. Next week, we are going to be talking about financial wellness. We're going to have some people from DOI Extension coming in to not only talk about, how to stretch your dollar, which can include SNAP benefits, but how to prepare for the expensive holiday season that's coming up. So definitely tune into that. We have a song from Sting that's going to take us out, but definitely make sure to tune in next week as we talk about financial wellness.
Thank you, ladies. Nice job.
Thank you.
I am so sorry that I had to keep getting up and stressed up for.
I think you gave me your cough. I thought,
Oh my God, I haven't coughed all day long, and I am.
The moment you have a microphone, I'm ready to
I
say
know, and it wasn't even like a gentle, discreet one either. It was a horrible